Earthquake, the big one, has been exciting guests at Universal Studios Hollywood since 1989, and also at Universal Orlando before it got turned into one of the worst rides Universal has ever made. Earthquake traps you in a subway station as it gets hit by an 8.3 on the Richter scale earthquake. The ride used many effects to properly pull off total and utter chaos. Water is rushing from a broken pipe causing a massive flood, a gas tanker breaks through the ceiling, a runaway train splits in half, almost hitting you. Universal made one of the most overstimulating attractions of all time. In all seriousness, I don't think Universal has been able to match something like this, at least at Hollywood, for a while. Even years later, the attraction is incredibly impressive. They still haven't gotten rid of it out of the studio tour, so I feel like that should show you how impressive it really is. Universal Orlando had a tarnished version of Earthquake for years with Disastrous, a ride that puts you and your family in a disaster movie with the power of chroma key, starring beloved Voss water bottle pisser Dwayne Johnson. And eventually it got replaced by Fast and the Furious Supercharged, which is somehow a worse version of the studio tour stop. Mostly because it is a longer, more drawn out version of the studio tour stop, and also for the fact that it took away a beloved classic Universal attraction. This will be one of the last of our series of all the original Universal attractions, and weirdly, this is the one with the least information on it. It was a main attraction at Universal Orlando when it first opened, so you'd think it would get the same amount of coverage as Jaws or Confrontation, but it really didn't. So today we'll be doing a little bit of a deep dive, and we'll be discussing the history of Earthquake at both Universal Orlando and Hollywood. And in order to properly tell the story of Earthquake, we had to go back to the year 1989. Tim Burton's Batman was a hit in theaters, and McDonald's was trying to make its own pizza, which failed horribly. Also at the same time, Universal Studios Hollywood was making big moves in the late 80s and early 90s, with many major attractions opening around the same time. This led to the very first head of Universal Creative, Barry Upson, to set out and expand the studio tour with new stops and attractions to make it an exciting theme park experience, as well as an educational one. And of course, Earthquake was one of them. Developed to bring some more thrills to the studio tour, Universal was riding off the success of the King Kong encounter and set out to make the next big budget stop for the studio tour. Unlike previous attractions, this would be directed by attraction director Larry Lester, who looked for inspiration from the classic 1974 film Earthquake, which is a common theme among most of these stops. They're all based around hits from the mid-70s, which isn't a lot, but it's weird it at least happened 3 times. The original film was famous for its special effects and using highly detailed models to pull off the most destructive scenes. The film also used state-of-the-art sound technology with Sen surround sound, which could reach up to 120 decibels, meaning the sound could literally shake the theater that it was being screened in. The stop would also feature some of the largest animated objects Universal had ever made, and they would also construct one of the largest sound stages they ever built to house the attraction. I love how much money Universal was just willing to throw at these attractions at this point. They were all massive in scale and featured an incredible amount of detail. I feel like a broken record here, but I feel like they don't really do them like they used to. In order to build the new Soundstage 50, Universal would have to deconstruct their London Tower set, which was featured in films such as the very on the nose The Tower of London, starring Boris Karloff, and more importantly, several episodes of Murder, She Wrote. Royal Hydraulics would come in to help with the motion platform for the tram, and with the help of technical coordinator Nick Drobness, the stop would feature an 11,000 pound wall that collapses from the ceiling, 60,000 gallons of rushing water, a simulated 40-mile-an-hour train crash, tons of fire effects, 2 million volts of electricity, tons of crashing and falling debris, the floor even splits open at one point, and it was just all a huge undertaking for Universal Creative. And surprisingly, besides the ride being closed for actual earthquakes, the stop was fairly easy to reset, with it being able to be reset every 30 to 15 seconds. It was fairly reliable, and when it premiered, it was just another stop that would bring guests to Universal Studios Hollywood. It's gone through many renovations over the years with new sound systems and touch-ups here and there. They recently renovated Earthquake at Universal Studios Hollywood to kind of, modernize it, and it has stuff like e-bike chargers, and for some reason the gas truck is now a hydrogen truck, and there's more of a harder focus on it actually being a film set that is all fake, so there's like modern camera equipment and lights littering the subway station, and this change kind of takes away the retro charm from the original. I kind of like that it looks like this dated subway station, but the fact that Universal is actually touching up and upgrading the attraction makes me feel like Earthquake is safe for the time being, and it was worth the clean modern look they added to it if it stays around for a little bit longer. Also, all real Universal Studios Hollywood fans know that it was featured in the episode of Bones, and they just can't stop telling you about that. I think they've been playing that clip for over a decade at this point. So Earthquake comes out, it's a big hit, and then Universal starts development of Universal Orlando, and they've started to understand that they're they're going to have to pivot away from rebuilding the studio tour due to Michael Eisner basically stealing their ideas and starting construction on his own studio park over at Disney World. This had almost copy and paste Universal Studio Tour tram ride. For those of you who have been watching, you know the story already. Universal decided to step it up and develop the studio tour stops into full-fledged attractions. This would be the start of the Disney versus Universal rivalry, which we are still benefiting from to this day. Keep fighting, guys. We only get better and better stuff from it. Earthquake was one of the attractions Universal was looking to create. Universal contracted ride and show engineering to construct the ride, which would turn out to be a huge mistake. Same as the Jaws attraction, when Earthquake first opened, it faced many technical issues due to poor design and construction by the company. Earthquake and Kong would be affected by a large power outage on top of the various technical issues that they both had, and this would spark a lawsuit between the company, which ride and show would have to pay a settlement out of court to Universal. An Earthquake would go under basically technical rehearsal, indicated by a little sign in the front of the ride, until October of 1990. Universal would eventually be able to buff out any technical issues with the ride, but ultimately the reputation of Universal was for sure hurt at first by this huge blunder. The Orlando attraction hits many of the same beats of the Hollywood version, except it's over 20 minutes long due to its special effects demonstration pre-show. The ride would be located in the San Francisco section of the park, which is thematically a perfect location. The start of Earthquake would have guests walk into a San Francisco train station, which on the inside had various images and memorabilia from the film. Here, a cast member would greet guests and take volunteers for the up-and-coming special effects demonstration. Large doors would open, taking guests into a dark room filled with a large screen in the center. Here you would watch a video featuring Charlton Heston as he talks about the various effects and techniques that were used in order to pull off the effects in the film. Earthquake is famous for its model work, so of course after this the video on the screen would rise and reveal an insanely cool model of the set that was featured in the film. In the next room you'd walk into another large soundstage room with a fake destroyed skyscraper. Here Charlton Heston would talk back and forth with a live cast member and would explain how matte paintings pulled off the large scale scenes from the film, giving them depth. We learn that this blown out skyscraper is an exact replica from the film, and they will be using the same techniques live in front of us. We see a live video feed which basically just shows us how the matte painting works, and it shows just how believable this effect can be. And then the cast member explains that they'll be throwing a dummy off the building in place of an actual stuntman. The next scene would be explaining how shaky cam and faux walls were used to pull off shaking earthquake sequences, and volunteers would be playing actors freaking out on an escalator as another guest pulls a rope that causes a fake support column to break. This is a pretty silly and simple way to engage audiences with a semi-educational lesson on filmmaking, which is on point for a movie studio theme park. After this, Charlton tells us that the last thing we gotta do is get a big crowd shot. We are transported to a live film set themed around a San Francisco subway station. Once on board, the train moves forward a little bit where it stops at another subway stop. This version is much larger in scale than the Hollywood version, which makes the whole theming and atmosphere much more realistic in my opinion. Pretty soon, chaos ensues as lights begin to flicker and rumbling can be felt within the subway car. Sparks are falling from the ceiling and signs are falling, electrical boxes are busting open and are exploding with electricity, the lights dim and we hear the sound of concrete cracking as a large wall drops from the ceiling, just like the Hollywood version, and a large gasoline truck slides, bursting into a column which catches the truck, saving us. The truck leaves a large fire in its wake as behind us a runaway train car crashes, splitting in half. This is when the water main breaks and water spills out from the staircases of the station, and after this they yell cut and we are thanked for our participation. Weirdly, the tram moves backwards into the original station riders boarded on, and guests would exit, and that's pretty much it. The Hollywood and Orlando version are practically the same experience, but Orlando for sure has a leg up in scale, and also the fact you ride in a subway car and not a tram, it just adds to the immersion of it all. And even though it just got a new ugly facelift, I'm still glad that we have this at Universal Studios Hollywood. Earthquake is a classic and truly represents the original goal of Universal Studios parks, to put guests in a semi-educational yet fun experience that makes you feel like you're a part of the filmmaking experience. Now, this is the part where we discuss how Earthquake was ruined. Despite its numerous technical issues, Earthquake remained fairly popular for years to come. It was only until the early 2000s Universal began to lose confidence that guests would recognize and connect with the film from the 70s. So they wanted to attempt to make Earthquake timeless by removing any connection from any films, focusing on an original concept centering around a fictional movie production company called Disastrous Studios. The studio isn't doing very well and it needs visitors actors to fill in as extras on its latest film. On November 5th, 2007, Universal closed Earthquake for good, and that was the day that they actually just announced that they were doing something with it, which is crazy to think about in today's standards. When rides are closed, they usually give them like large celebrations now, and they drag out the closings for weeks. They make merch like celebrating it. This renovation only took Universal a little under 2 months to complete, and the ride soft opened in late December of 2007, and due to some technical issues, it was delayed until January of 2008. They held a big opening ceremony, which Dwayne himself was in attendance, and Disaster would have guests walk through the abandoned lot of Disastrous Studios, which featured several large props that were from various fictional films produced by the company. One of the highlights being a mechanical shark from their film Das Shark, which was just ahead of one of the Jaws animatronics with some little added details. After this, we would walk into the same opening room as Earthquake, just without all the earthquake theming. In its place are various posters and portraits from the long history of Disaster Studios. Also, there's a giant Disaster Studios sign as well. Similar to Earthquake, an assistant director named Lonnie, played by a cast member, would come out and take volunteers to participate in the various scenes in the film. After the volunteers were all ready to go, we moved into the next room, which features Christopher Walken with the power of fusion technology. This is a fun scene where the cast member and Christopher Walken have a back and forth, and Christopher Walken is silly and goofy and talks very frantically about disaster movie filmmaking, and then after his speech, we are sent into the next room where volunteers would participate in the various shots for the short film. The first is a road background, which the volunteer would act like they were laying on, and on camera it just looks like the volunteer is laying in the road, but it's just like this cardboard cutout background. Next, they would grab someone from the crowd who could scream really loud, and they would quickly grab a shot of them screaming, and after a series of various green screen shots, the guests pretend to be scared, and we are ushered into the earthquake room to get a big crowd shot once again. This time the tram was fitted with cameras to capture the guests' reactions on the ride. After the unchanged earthquake section, guests would come to see a trailer for the film that they just made. Some of these are classic. The road scene especially is hilarious because they make it look like The Rock catches the guests and then just poses with them in the road. It's super goofy. Cut between all these shots is a video of the guests on the actual tram portion of the ride, which doesn't really work because it is a dark ride, so it's kind of dark footage of people getting shaken around in a car, which I just don't know. I don't think it really works, but it's silly. I think this little movie trailer section is probably one of the best parts of this whole experience. It does really add something to Earthquake, but also it just kind of takes away any of that like classic Hollywood feel of, I don't know, it just feels very like tacky compared to it. And again, this was their goal to make Earthquake, you know, more relevant, stay modernized for longer, which is funny because now people can do the same thing on their phones at this point. So instead of re-theming the Earthquake portion again, they announced on August 25th, 2015 that Fast and the Furious Supercharged would be getting a full ride treatment, and this would be replacing both Disaster and the Beetlejuice Rock and Roll Graveyard Review. And without saying too much, because I want to cover this ride as its own video, Fast and the Furious Supercharged is one of the worst rides Universal has ever made. It feels like a bad mobile game ad. It's honestly kind of a joke and a meme at this point, and I do have an ironic love for it because it's just so openly bad. But long story short, if it's a Universal attraction, nothing is sacred. Earthquake and Disaster were both classic parts of Universal, and it's sad to see them fall victim to the great Universal screen debacle. Now, I want to open the conversation to you guys. What are your feelings towards Earthquake? Did you love it? Are you sad it's gone? I know Fast and the Furious is like the worst, but I kind of want to hear about your early experiences. Did you ride it when it first opened? Did you understand or see any of the technical issues that were going on? Just let me know. Also, for any of my Hollywood people, how do you feel about that new re-theme? Do you think it's as ugly as I do? Let me know. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.